Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Nick frantic, Nikki versus Victor, Tessa's decision. Nick Newman to be frantic after learning about Jack Abbott's offer. Nikki Newman fights with Victor Newman. Plus, Tessa Porter makes a painful decision. Keep reading, and let's talk about what's coming up in the CBS Cleaner Pieces. Nick Newman's mission. Let's launch off with Nick, who'll be on a new charge despite his broken leg. The man will probably find out about Jack's offer to Victor Newman. Despite Matt Clark being deadly and dangerous, Victor turned down the proposition. Nick will end up turning to Jack for help. Indeed, though Matt was Jack's only log-rolling chip, it's empty if Victor rejected it. So, Nick will maintain with Jack for his help. The last thing that Jack or Nick want is for Matt to be on the loose again. It's also stated that Nick keeps a secret from Sharon Newman. Still, will Nick end up lamenting that decision? Victor Newman's aftermath. The young and the restless spoilers for coming week reveal that Victor will put Kane Ashby in a tough position. A bit latterly, Nikki gets into a vicious argument with Victor. Could this be the morning of the end of their marriage? At Newman Enterprises, anticipate Victoria Newman and Adam Newman to be on a common charge. The two will work to do damage control. Away, Diane Jenkins Abbott begs for intel from Michael Baldwin. Michael is just as upset, so he could agree that Victor has eventually gone too far. Noah Newman's disturbing discovery. As for Noah Newman, the youthful man learns commodity about Matt. Still, will this end up helping take the man down? What differently to anticipate? As for the rest of the week, Diane issues a demand to Jack. It's about Jack's fidelity to Nikki. Sharon counsels Tessa Porter. From an exercise clip, it seems that Tessa will admit that it turns too important regarding her relationship with Mariah Copeland. Suckers can also anticipate Sally Spectra to get the verity out of Billy Abbott. Still, the verity could destroy their love, so stay tuned. Nick and Jack connect. Nikki's last straw. Victor's counterreaction. Nick Newman to turn to Jack Abbott for help. Meanwhile, Nikki Newman reaches her limit. Keep reading, and let's talk about what's coming up in the CBS Cleaner Pieces. Nick Newman's fear. Let's launch off with Victor Newman, who unexpectedly turned Jack down on his offer. Nikki didn't indeed understand it. When Jack asked what was more important to Victor than guarding his family, Nikki said she actually didn't know. When Nick learns about Victor rejecting Jack's offer, he'll fly into a fear. The man nearly failed because of Matt Clark. Noah Newman and Sienna Bacall also nearly lost their lives from the madcap. Nick will turn to Jack for help. Indeed, though Jack wants to cover Jabot, he's also a decent man with morals. So, Jack will of course do what he can to help Nick. Still, Nick might end up promising him to have Victor make effects right. It's also teased that Nick will keep a secret from Sharon Newman. Victor Newman backlash. Meanwhile, Victor backs Kane Ashby into a corner. A bit latterly, Victor and Nikki get into a fierce argument. At Newman Enterprises, Adam Newman and Victoria Newman try to do damage control. As for Diane Jenkins Abbott, she meets with Michael Baldwin again. Will Michael agree that Victor needs to be stopped? Noah Newman's shocking discovery. The young and the restless spoilers for coming week reveal that Noah will make a shocking discovery about Matt. Could this information actually help them negotiate a deal with the villain? What differently to anticipate? As for the rest of the week, Diane is fed up with Jack being so pious to Nikki. The woman issues and claim. Sharon helps Tessa Porter make a tough decision about Mariah Copeland. While Sharon loves her son, she can also see how important pain Tessa has been in. It's also not fair for Aria Porter, Copeland. I could see Sharon saying Tessa will always be family, indeed if she divorces Mariah. Also, Sally Spectra eventually forces Billy Abbott to come clean. Still, the verity could unravel their relationship in a heartache, so stay tuned. Nick Newman's secret battle with pain is one of the most harrowing and gut-wrenching tragedies in Genoa City's recent history, a narrative that began still, nearly gradually, as the attractive, putatively imperishable Newman heir at law faced a pain that was both physical and emotional, one that he chose to bear alone, hidden behind his trademark charm and stoic grins, because to Nick, vulnerability was weakness, and weakness was commodity he could no way show, not to his family, not to his associates. Not indeed to the people who loved him most, and yet beneath the face of his confident surface, a storm was raging, a storm fueled by injuries, bummers, and the grim pressure to uphold the Newman name while trying to live a life that was decreasingly ungovernable. For months, perhaps times, he'd been floundering with habitual pain that no bone completely understood, pain that would flare up suddenly, leaving him breathless, exhausted, and hopeless, yet he refused to admit it openly, always brushing off concerned questions from Sharon, his mama, and indeed Victoria, who had tried numerous times to reach him, because Nick had always been the kind of man who would rather fight alone than burden anyone differently, and so he started, nearly innocently, with over-the-counter specifics, also moving to conventions that were stronger, each one promising relief, each one carrying its own retired peril, but Nick, ever the perfectionist, ever the man who had to appear in control, ignored the warnings, attributing that he could manage it, that he was smarter than the medicines, that he could handle it, and for a while, it sounded to work, his pain dulled enough to allow him to serve, to run Newman Enterprises, to engage in his social life, to smile for the cameras and laugh with his musketeers. But the relief was temporary, transitory, and cruelly deceptive, because the deeper into the tradition he went, the further dependent he came, and the more fragile his precisely constructed facade grew, like a house of cards pulsing in the fewest breath, yet no bone saw it. Or if they did, they ignored it, believing that Nick Newman, with his strong jaw, piercing blue eyes, and redoubtable intellect, could no way fall victim to commodities so mortal, so vulnerable, so ruinous, and perhaps that was part of the tragedy that Nick had created an image of invincibility so perfect that no bone noticed the cracks forming beneath it, cracks that widened every day as his reliance on the medicines increased, and every time he took a lozenge, he felt a transitory relief that was incontinently replaced by guilt and shame, eating tone, loathing that he tried to mask with humor or affront, because admitting the verity, that he was addicted, that he was hurting, that he was losing control was more intimidating than any physical pain he'd ever endured, more intimidating than the study of losing a business, more intimidating than losing the love of his family, because to Nick, to admit weakness was to admit mortality, and Nick had always believed that he was untouchable, that his restraint could overcome anything, yet sluggishly, insidiously, the medicines were winning, controlling his studies, controlling his conduct, controlling the veritably substance of who he was. And the tragedy escalated in small, nearly inappreciable ways at first, missed meetings, a curt tone to a cherished coworker, a blench of vexation at a joke, subtle signs that musketeers might have noticed had they looked closer, but Nick was a master of disguise, a man who could smile through pain, who could charm his way out of scrutiny. And so the signs went unnoticed, ignored or accounted down, and also came the bigger signs arguments with Sharon about his jest. Enterprises raised by Victoria about his well-being, upset aesthetics changed by his siblings, all of which he dismissed with a surge of his hand, a joke, a pledge to get it under control, no way revealing the intimidating verity that every lozenge he swallowed brought him closer to the edge, near to the ocean, near to a fate that no bone not indeed Nick himself could completely provision, and also the incidents came more pronounced, more intimidating, as the medicines began to take a risk on his mind as well as his body missed movables, disconnected exchanges, confusion about details that Nick Newman, the brilliant businessman, would typically flash back without vacillation, setbacks in judgment, small accidents that suggested at a growing incapability to serve as he formerly had, all of which scarified those closest to him, yet Nick's pride, his intransigence, and his shame averted him from admitting the verity, and in his private moments, when the house was quiet and the hangouts were drawn, he'd sit alone, gaping at the capsules in his hand, wondering how it had come to this, wondering how a man who had formerly controlled everything in his life now set up himself enslaved to a substance that promised relief but delivered only despair, wondering if anyone would ever understand. Wondering if anyone would ever forgive him for what was passing. And yet in those same quiet moments, there was a spark of defiance, a belief that he could overcome it, a stopgap that he could reclaim his life, that he could be the Nick Newman everyone loved and respected, the man who was strong, flexible, unbreakable, but the medicines were grim, eroding that strength bit by bit, until one cataclysmal night, the capstone of months of secretiveness, denial, and suffering led to a disastrous event. A moment that would shake Genoa City to its core, because Nick, seeking relief from pain that had come unsupportable, took further than he should have, ignored the warning signs that screamed at him from within, and in that moment, the medicines, which he'd trusted and yet stressed, betrayed him hugely, and the consequences were immediate and unrecoverable, leaving his family in shock, his musketeers in mourning, and the entire megacity scuffling with the reality that Nick Newman, the man who had sounded insurmountable, had succumbed to a pain that no bone could see and a battle that no bone could fight for him, and as news of his death spread, the tragedy came layered, because it wasn't just the loss of a cherished man, but the disclosure of a retired struggle, a memorial of the troubles of undressed pain and dependence, and a stark assignment about the fragility of indeed the strongest among us, and the shockwaves gurgled through every corner of the Newman family. Victor, his father, scuffling with guilt over whether he'd missed signs, whether he could have done more. Sharon, his mama, overwhelmed by grief and wrathfulness at the secretiveness, at the atrocity of the complaint that had claimed her son. Victoria, torn between sadness and frustration, visited by the words she had said and the interventions she had forced. The siblings, all scuffling with unbelief, denial, and a crushing sense of loss, and the workers of Newman Enterprises, who set up themselves facing the harsh reality that their leader, their friend, was gone, and that the company he'd erected, the conglomerate he'd nurtured, was now in the hands of a grieving family trying to navigate both commercial and particular tragedy, and as the megacity mourned, exchanges erupted about the pressures of wealth, the secretiveness girding pain, and the retired struggles of those who appear strong and successful, because Nick's story wasn't just about medicines or dependence. It was about the mortal tendency to hide suffering, to present a facade of control, and the disastrous consequences when that suffering is ignored or undervalued, and Genoa City would flash back, long after the original shock faded, the image of Nick Newman, a man whose life was defined by brilliance, charm, and adaptability, yet eventually undone by pain he couldn't openly defy, a man whose secret struggle ended in heartache, exemplary tale of pride, secretiveness, and the ruinous power of dependence. And in the weeks and months that followed, monuments were held, gashes exfoliate, and hearts broken, yet indeed in mourning, there was an acknowledgement of his heritage, a memorial to cherish honesty, to reach out to those suffering in silence, to no way underrate the weight someone carries behind a smile, because Nick Newman's death wasn't just a caption or a plot. It was a profound mortal tragedy that forced Genoa City to defy uncomfortable trueness, to question the pressures of perfection, to face the silent battles fought behind unrestricted doors, and to flash back that occasionally, indeed the strongest, most brilliant, and utmost cherished among us, are fighting wars that the world cannot see, wars that, if left implied and undressed, can have consequences that echo far beyond a single life, changing families, communities, and hearts ever, a memorial that compassion, alert, and openness are vital, because Nick Newman's life, brilliance, and ultimate demise, hidden behind secretiveness and pain, educate us that tragedy frequently comes quietly, and its assignments are as enduring as the grief it leaves in its wake, a story of a man who gave so important to others yet plodded alone, and a story that will hang Genoa City for times, a painful, important, indelible exemplary tale of what can be when the battle within is fought alone, unseen, and undressed, leaving behind echoes of anguish, questions of what if, and the haunting memorial that occasionally love, indeed when present, cannot help. Tragedy if the pain and suffering remain retired, a story that's at formerly devastating and illuminating, heartbreaking and instructional, because Nick Newman, in life, was larger than life, and in death, his story serves as a solemn warning of the mortal cost of secretiveness, denial, and the silent burden of pain. The aftermath of Nick Newman's death rippled through Genoa City like an unrelenting storm, leaving heartbreak, guilt, and anger in its wake, because while the tragedy had ended his suffering, it also exposed the raw, messy reality of a man who had carried his pain in secret, a man whose brilliance, charm, and perceived invincibility had masked an inner turmoil so intense that even those closest to him had been unable to see it. And as Victor Newman grappled with the enormity of losing his son, he was confronted not only with grief, but with profound self-recrimination, the crushing what-ifs that echoed in his mind as he questioned every interaction, every moment, every decision that could have made a difference, every word he had failed to say or question he had failed to ask, because Victor, for all his business acumen, had assumed that Nick's strength could carry him through anything. And now he was left to face the cruel truth that no amount of power, influence, or wealth could shield a loved one from the hidden demons that silently grow within, and the image of Nick alone in his home, surrounded by bottles and pills, became a haunting emblem of that truth, a visual of a life unraveling far from the eyes of those who loved him. And as Sharon tried to navigate her grief, she found herself trapped between overwhelming sorrow and paralyzing guilt, questioning whether there had been moments when she could have intervened, whether her intuition had failed her, whether her love could have made a difference. But the truth, as cruel as it was that Nick's struggle had been meticulously hidden, wrapped in layers of pride, denial, and fear, and even her closeness, her maternal instinct, had not been enough to penetrate the walls he had built, walls that ultimately proved insurmountable, leaving her to grieve not just his death, but the fact that she had never truly known the depths of his suffering. And Victoria, who had always shared a complicated but profound bond with her brother, was forced to reconcile her grief with anger, anger at the drugs that had ensnared him, anger at the world that had failed to intervene, anger at the realization that even in their closeness, there had been parts of Nick's life she had never seen, never understood, and that his brilliant smile, his teasing jokes, his confident presence had all been a performance, a carefully orchestrated mask concealing pain and dependency, and this revelation shook her to her core, leaving her questioning the nature of trust, love, and family, wondering how someone so intelligent, so strong, so beloved, could succumb to something so ordinary, so insidious, and yet so lethal. And as the days turned to weeks, and Genoa City tried to process the loss, the story of Nick's secret became a cautionary tale whispered in offices, in salons, in restaurants, a sobering reminder of the dangers of pride, the dangers of secrecy, the dangers of trying to handle everything alone, and the ripple effects of his death touched everyone in ways both subtle and dramatic, from employees of Newman Enterprises who struggled to focus amid grief and fear, to friends like Phyllis, who had known him intimately yet had not seen the depth of his suffering, to lovers like Sharon, who now found herself navigating both heartbreak and the overwhelming challenge of supporting her own emotional survival. And even casual acquaintances were left shaken, as the man they had admired for his wit, charm, and resilience was revealed to have been a man in silent agony, a man whose private battles were more devastating than anyone could have imagined. And as the weeks progressed, the Newman family found themselves entangled not only in grief, but in complex practicalities, funeral arrangements, the transfer of business responsibilities, and the careful navigation of public scrutiny, because in Genoa City, even tragedy becomes public spectacle, and the family had to protect Nick's legacy, his dignity, and the truth, all while wrestling with the unbearable reality that his death was preventable in some ways, a consequence of secrets, denial, and the insidious nature of addiction. And as Sharon visited his home for the first time after the news, the rooms that had once echoed with laughter, banter, and Nick's unmistakable presence now felt suffocatingly silent, suffused with shadows of what had been. The medicine bottles lined on counters and nightstands like markers of a war she had never known, and every detail seemed to scream at her, every pill a reminder of the agony he had tried to hide. And as she sat in the quiet, she imagined his thoughts, the fear, the shame, the exhaustion, and the defiance, the repeated promises to himself that he would get it under control. while the controls slipped farther and farther away, and the weight of imagining. That inner torment left her trembling, crying, whispering apologies that could never be heard, because he was gone, taken by a combination of pain, secrecy, and the very drugs that had promised relief, a tragic irony that pierced her heart and made every memory of him bittersweet.